Thank you for joining us. My name is Ryan Burrows, Executive Director of the American Kratom Association. We scheduled this meeting this evening to give you the latest details regarding the federal KCPA, as well as the details for a very special congressional briefing scheduled for December 13th at the U.S. Capitol. We are joined this evening by Mac Haddo, Senior Fellow on Public Policy for the American Kratom Association, as well as Matt Salmon, former United States Representative of Arizona and the Chairman of the American Kratom Association. Thank you all again for joining us. The Q&A is open, and I will now turn it over to Matt Salmon.
Welcome, everybody. We're thrilled to have you with us tonight. This is an incredibly important time for those of us that are Kratom users, and more importantly, for anybody who cares about good public policy here in this country. This congressional briefing that's going to take place that Ryan just spoke of on December 13th at 11:30 at the, it will be at the Visitor Center at the Capitol. We're going to be inviting some of the key staff members and members of the Congress from both the House and the Senate side. And I can't emphasize enough how important these kinds of meetings are. Knowledge is what is key to every congressional office. I don't think most members have formed an opinion of Kratom one way or the other. Well, I say that we have a KCPA bill that has been introduced, and we have vast support across the aisle on both sides in the House and the Senate. And so we do have several people, but when you look at the 435 members of the House and the 100 members of the Senate, I would say it's just a fraction of the total number of the members of Congress that really know much about Kratom at all. And so our job is to educate them. Heaven help us if the only education they get is by reading some of these crazy articles in the newspaper or get their information from the FDA. I've mentioned this before to many of you that are probably on the call now. I apologize, but it really was in 2016 where we put the FDA on their heels by getting the Kratom consumers across America to band together and make their voices heard. And because of that, I was heavily influenced to support the Kratom initiative as a sitting member of the House, and spearheaded a letter along with Mac Haddo to basically put the FDA on its heels and stop it at that time from trying to influence the DEA from scheduling Kratom as a narcotic. And we were successful in that venture, but the only reason we were is because of people like you that are on the call. I will tell you that when Mac and I go speak to somebody, hopefully it moves the needle a little bit, but if you actually live in their district and you vote, and they can count on you as a supporter or someone that's going to go work against them if you don't like what they say, they're going to really care a lot more what you think. And on the 13th, we're going to be providing an opportunity for you to set up meetings with your member of Congress, your member of the House, to go in and meet with him or her or their key staff people to let them know what the truth is about Kratom and how important it is to you. But right now, I know Mac's been working tirelessly. The Prime Minister from Indonesia was visiting with President Biden. Has that happened yet, Mac, or is that tomorrow?
Yeah, President Widodo from Indonesia actually met with President Biden at 4 o'clock today. Yes,
right. And he told us that he was going to bring up the issue that the FDA is imposing on the import alert, where they're misusing an import alert, which is supposed to be used if there is a contaminant in a particular product, like E. coli or another contaminant, high metal content, something like that. And so we have been communicating with the folks in Indonesia on a regular basis. I know Mac's been over there several times. And the Indonesian Prime Minister conveyed to us that in his meeting with Biden today, he was going to bring up how important it is to turn off that import alert that the FDA is using right now inappropriately. So, because it's having a big harmful effect on Indonesia's economic development opportunities. And interestingly enough, we did some research and found that it's having a profound impact on the climate over there. And so the Indonesian prime minister was going to bring up those issues and try to persuade President Biden to weigh in with the FDA. So I want to thank you again for joining on the call today. There is so many important things happening in states all across the country. We've been working to try to institute the KCPA to stop bans in some of the states that are looking at them, and deal with the press, which has not been real friendly in the past because they're lazy and they take some of the facts. I say facts, so-called facts, thrown at them by the FDA for gospel, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. But the truth is that no matter how many lobbyists we hire, it's not going to move the needle without constituents, without people like you that are willing to show up at this briefing on December 13th, and also set up meetings with your member of Congress and let them know what this means to you. So I'm going to close there and hand it back to Ryan.
Thank you very much, Matt, for joining us this evening, and I will now turn it over to Matt Caddo.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Matt. This is, as Matt said, an incredible opportunity for us where we have organized and gotten approval to present a congressional briefing on kratom. In this particular circumstance, we will be inviting key staffers and members from both the Senate and the House to listen to the experts on kratom. We believe that science should direct the policy on kratom. And I understand that there are people who think, well, no, I have a personal experience with kratom that was negative. And I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But overall, all of our public policy on these kinds of substances should be directed by good, reliable science, well-defined. And it's much like the roadmap that Dr. Brett Giroir, who was the Assistant Secretary for Health, who infamously removed and withdrew the recommendation for scheduling on August 16th of 2018. And when he did, he properly characterized the evidence and data that had been developed by the FDA to justify that recommendation as being embarrassingly poor evidence and data. And importantly, he added, and a failure to consider the overall public health. But then he did something that was astounding in his withdrawal letter. He laid out the roadmap for the FDA to do the scientific research that's necessary to determine one way or the other what the addiction profile and safety profile of kratom actually is. And unfortunately, the FDA didn't follow that roadmap. In fact, they haven't even taken a baby step towards the numerous items and pathways he laid out that were essential to lead them to a good conclusion about kratom. Now, it's not the first time the FDA has been wrong, but in this particular case, they seem particularly focused on kratom because they want to prove themselves right. And we find in the kratom community and in the scientific community an alignment with one thing, and that is we want to know the truth about it. I know that there were pioneering scientists in the kratom space like Chris McCurdy and Walter Proslizak and now Oliver Grundmann and numerous others, Albert Garcia Romeo, Dr. Kirsten Smith from Johns Hopkins, now formerly of NIDA, Dr. Jack Henningfield, Dr. Marilyn Eustace, Dr. Mark Swager, Dr. Paula Brown. The list goes on and on of scientists who objectively look at the evidence and data and make a determination and judgment about what the proper characterization of kratom is. So this particular briefing will give us the opportunity to recap where that evidence and data is. And I would remind everyone that when Dr. Giroir made his assessment and then withdrew the recommendation made by the FDA to schedule kratom, he said to me, he said, I am not a proponent of kratom. He said, I don't know whether kratom is good or bad, but what I do know is good science when I see it, and the FDA wasn't even close. And that's the problem that we have right now, is that there's no pursuit for scientific evidence and excellence that's being made by the FDA in order to come to a conclusion that could be reliably proven with respect to the addiction and safety profile of kratom. And in fact, the evidence has turned against them since that seminal date of August 16th of 2018, there have been more than 100 peer-reviewed published articles which document that kratom is a safe and non-addictive substance. Now, sometimes we get confused about what that means. In the scientific world, saying something is not addictive, it means it's not dangerously addictive. There are many, many substances that we ingest every day that create a dependency, including kratom. You can, if you abuse it, you can harm yourself with kratom, because that's the nature of any kind of self-abusive behavior when you consume too much of something, or you do it too quickly, or whatever the circumstances are. There is an element of consumer responsibility that is critical to the consumption of any consumer product that you have. So this is something that we all need to keep squarely in our sights. And I was fascinated to hear Dr. Kirsten Smith in her testimony before the Ohio Senate Health Committee, where she was answering the question as to why there wasn't more research into kratom's addiction liability, because of the claims being made by some individuals say, oh, it's highly addictive. And what she said was, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, one is that it's a boring subject because there are no significant data-driven evidence that would lead us to do more research. There's no need for it because kratom is boring, as she said. And secondly, she pointed out that if there was a driver for research, if there was a signal of safety or significant addiction liability, the scientists would be all over it. And that's something to keep in context as we look at this particular issue. All of that is going to be presented at this congressional briefing. The unique part of what we're asking for you is to let you know that we're inviting you to come to Washington, D.C. to participate in this event. The first thing, of course, is the actual briefing that will take place at 11 a.m. In the Capitol Hill Visitor Center, and you'll get further information on the exact room number and the panelists that will be presenting there. Then, following that, if you're able to come, then you can go and do visits to your congressional delegation, in-person visits with either the staff or the member. Great opportunity to share your perspective on kratom. Great opportunity to maybe meet your congressman or senator, get a picture with them, but really to tell your heartfelt story about kratom. So we encourage everyone who can to participate in this activity. It is a burden to come to Washington, D.C. I remember that many people back in 2016, when the last really big rally was held, really had to stretch financially and sacrifice to get here, but the cause was just. And in this case, we're asking people to do the same thing. We obviously don't have the resources to fund people coming to Washington, but for those who are able to do so and have the time and the resources to commit to this, we welcome you. We will provide support to help set up meetings with your congressional delegation. And it's something that will be critically important, as Matt said, that you get to tell your personal story, because that really does move the needle for these particular legislators. This is not in any way to suggest that ours is the only story along the way. There are critics of kratom. There are people who deeply believe that their families were harmed because of the use of kratom and that there was a death. Now, we obviously take the position that these families have a right to know what the truth is about it, and they should not be misled by overly aggressive trial attorneys who are trying to build class action suits in order to enrich themselves. And I say that confidently because we see from the evidence that no one in that trial attorney community is suing the Food and Drug Administration. And if there is anyone responsible for badly formulated or adulterated products that are on the market today of kratom products that shouldn't be there, it's the Food and Drug Administration. It is their statutory duty to do so. And they cannot say that they don't know about these products. First, they have an army of people that scrape social media sites every day. They're looking for whatever they can find about kratom, and that would include they're looking at companies that are making illegal therapeutic claims about kratom. They should be the first line of targets against the kratom industry that is rogue, that is making claims that are illegal. They should be put out of business. They should be prosecuted. The FDA has not, over the last 3 years, while we have been sending to them over 80 complaints, giving them the evidence, the actual screenshots and other evidence we've accumulated on the marketing activities of these companies that are making illegal therapeutic claims. They simply don't do a thing. The FDA did 3 of the 80 warning letters, which mean nothing in the real world of actual enforcement activity. They should be suing those people and taking them off the marketplace. And until the FDA does its job, then you're going to see a lot of these badly formulated, mislabeled, poorly advertised, illegally advertised, and probably very likely these are going to be illegal products in terms of the product content. Because if they say that the kratom product that they're marketing is super potent, highly concentrated extracts of a kratom material, that's an illegal product, and they should be taken off the marketplace. And I've referenced many times that sometimes it takes consumer responsibility too, because we know that in the case of the Florida situation, where the kratom consumer ingested a kratom product that was purchased on the internet called space dust, there is not a better poster child for what the FDA should have done in order to remove that product. They were aware of it. They knew it was being marketed. They knew the claims that were being made about it. But when the consumer got it, she got a plastic pouch with a Sharpie scrawled with the name Space Dust, which is the brand of the product that was being sold. And you flip it over and there's not a single word. There's no description of the contents of that product. There's no notice of warnings about how to properly use the product. There's no serving size recommendation. There's no number of serving sizes you should take in a day. Nothing. It was just blank. And that, by way of the decision of the courts, that was the cause of death for this individual. And that's a tragic event. It would be prevented by the Food and Drug Administration if they were doing their jobs. So why don't the trial attorneys actually file suit against the FDA for allowing those products to be on the market? And there's only one reason why they don't: money. They are not looking for a settlement from the federal government because they can't get any money out of the federal government. What they could do is compel the Food and Drug Administration to do their job. They don't. They're not interested in that. They're interested in only making a buck. And they can mislead every consumer down the primrose path and say, oh, this is something I feel in my heart. That's what some of these lawyers say. Trust me, they feel it in their wallet. They're not caring about their heart. They want to tell the people that are out there in the community of kratom consumers that if you feel like you've been harmed, or if they create a feeling that you've been harmed, they want you as a client. And that's the bottom line for what they're doing. We want to make sure that good science drives this policy. We want to convey the point to the staffers on Capitol Hill that an unregulated marketplace is dangerous. We want to make sure that the FDA, instead of focusing their efforts on shutting down legitimate kratom businesses and interdicting the imports from Indonesia of kratom raw materials, that they should have a rigorous set of regulations, just as they do for other food and dietary ingredient and botanical supplement products. And they should make sure that those products are manufactured properly, that they're properly labeled and properly marketed. And then you will clean up most of what happens. Now, is there a possibility that a person, because they don't act responsibly, could still harm themselves with a kratom product? Of course. But that's true for tens of thousands of dietary supplements, dietary ingredients, and botanical supplements and dietary supplements that are on the market today. If you don't act responsibly, you can harm yourself. And we know that that is a problem along the way. I feel for those families that have gone through the experience of losing someone and having them believe, because the FDA has misled the coroner or medical examiner, or the charlatans who claim to be evaluating the levels of kratom that would lead to a toxicity level, and that is the basis upon which a coroner or medical examiner determines that is the cause of death. There is no known toxic level to kratom. If there was, the FDA would be publishing it to the high heavens. If there was, the FDA would be able to go to the DEA and say, here it is. It's the golden ticket to scheduling. They can't do it because that science does not exist. And responsibly consumed like any other product, and responsibly marketed like many other products, and responsibly labeled like products should be, will deliver to the American consumers a safe product. And that's the obligation of the FDA. It is not what these trial attorneys are trying to say, that it's solely the responsibility of a kratom manufacturer. Now, I agree completely with going after a kratom company that markets irresponsibly. I think they're fair game because they should be held to account. Whether or not their product caused the death or not, or whether or not we know that there's no known toxic level kratom, but you can mix other substances in with kratom to give it an effect, an experience of a kratom consumer that the kratom consumer is unaware of, but gets duped into it. And we've seen circumstances where when you look at the tox screens of individuals, of people who passed away. They have high levels of other substances like fentanyl and heroin and morphine and cocaine and buprenorphine. Those are the kinds of things, when abused and taken in excess, can lead to the death. We also know that there, in many of the cases that have been reported by these trial attorneys to be caused by kratom, were actually, when you evaluate the autopsies and the tox screens, that there are other substances that were present in the tox screen that very well could have led to the fatality because they are contraindicated for the use of prescription medications. Never has there been a single, despite what the medical examiners and coroners say, because they say it, because the FDA says it, they repeat what the FDA says, never been a death that's been tied to, based on the evidence and data, that kratom caused the death. Now, can you have, in some circumstances, under some conditions, the potential for kratom death? I suppose so. But that isn't how we regulate products in the United States. What we do is we look for clusters of adverse events that are reported regularly to the FDA by medical professionals and consumers. And then the FDA looks at those clusters and tries to make a determination whether the adverse event or fatality was the result of taking kratom in conjunction with some other substance, or whether it was kratom alone. And they go through a steps of evaluation. And again, trust me, if the FDA had the evidence that showed that kratom on its own exclusively was the cause of deaths, then they would be knocking on the door of the Drug Enforcement Administration, making their case. We have seen consistently that Dr. Joie concluded, after his independent review of the FDA's evidence and data, you heard what his conclusion was. And in 2021, when the FDA took their case to the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and it was referred to 12 independent experts in what's called the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence, when they have a lower standard for scheduling than we have in the United States, they unanimously concurred that there was insufficient evidence to move forward with a scheduling procedure against kratom. Science should rule this discussion. So that's what we're looking for. We want to share with them, with these congressional staffers, and what we hope will then be combined with your story, your personal experience with kratom. Along the way, you're going to hear chatter. We see all the time that there is some internal dissension within the kratom community. That's tragic, because however well-meaning these critics are, because they don't like the American Kratom Association, they don't like largely the fact that we have, in their view, succumbed to this idea that we should regulate kratom. Many of them say there's no basis for any regulation on kratom. It should be open to any consumer under any circumstances. Now, that's an unrealistic viewpoint, but it's nonetheless held strongly by some in our community. They're wrong. And I say that respectfully, because the truth is that common products are regulated by the FDA that you take every day and you just don't see behind it. I had an advocate go after me 2 weeks ago and say, if what you're saying is true, then why is it that coffee is not regulated by the Food and Drug Administration? And I was a little surprised and stunned. And I said, well, coffee is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And he said, no, it's not. That's crazy. How could they regulate it? I asked him to look on the back of his coffee can to see if there were labeling and other kinds of information that is required by the FDA. And of course, there are. Water is regulated by the FDA. Any consumer product for which there could be a potential hazard, or if the use of that product were to be abused in such a manner to cause a harm, gets regulated under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and kratom is among that. And so our effort here was to find the middle ground to require the FDA to regulate kratom, despite the critics within the industry who believe that we should not be promoting that. And that's our goal, so that the FDA can responsibly regulate kratom. And that's the heart of the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act, which has now been filed by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, a very conservative Republican, and Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, very liberal Democrat. And on the House side, Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, very liberal from Wisconsin, and a Democrat. And you have Jack Bergman on the Republican side, very conservative member of the Congress from Michigan. These people are not drawn to issues that are partisan. This is an issue about philosophy, about how we protect the American consumer with responsible regulatory schemes, and that's what their bill does. It requires the FDA, after a series of public hearings, to promulgate regulations that would allow for the safe use of kratom that cannot be in excess of what they typically do with food, dietary ingredients, and botanical supplements. So they can't go haywire on that. It's the bill specifically says they cannot enact regulations that exceed what the standards would be for similar products. It also says that the FDA will not be able to use, and I would say abuse, the import alert authority granted to them by the Congress, which is supposed to protect American consumers from products that come to the United States that are contaminated or poorly formulated. And in this case, there was a legitimate argument that the FDA made, and they appropriately interdicted a shipment of kratom that led to a salmonella outbreak. Now, it was moderate by comparison to most others, but it did lead to some hospitalizations, and it did lead to an enforcement action that was entirely appropriate for kratom at that time for those particular shipments because there was salmonella in them. The standard for an import alert allows for an exporter of a product into the United States to file for a lifting of the import alert. And they have to demonstrate with scientific evidence and testing that their product is no longer contaminated. Now, the good news is there's not been an outbreak of salmonella contamination that the FDA has identified on any kratom raw material since 2018. We also know that the Indonesian government has cooperated fully, as are the processors, the major processors in Indonesia that are now putting into place testing procedures and cleansing procedures using gamma radiation that's approved by the FDA for botanical products to clear out all of those contaminants. Now, we're still at risk because there are some kratom farmers in the remote areas of the Borneo rainforest that are shipping kratom raw materials without it being processed and tested. And those are a risk for us. And I have said many times that they should be removed from the marketplace. I think that that's important. On September 29th of 2023, General Muldoko, who is the chief of staff to the president of the Republic of Indonesia, sent a letter to the FDA saying that we want you to lift the import alert. And in return for that action, we will guarantee that every kratom raw material shipped from Indonesia is gamma irradiated, so it's cleaned and independently tested to make sure that it's free from any contaminants. So it eliminates the substantial risk to the American population from kratom. The General Muldoko has not heard back from the FDA at this point, and sadly, I don't think he will, but he should, because you have a government that has an interest in protecting, from his standpoint, the 250,000 plus farmers and their families who live in very poor circumstances in remote areas of Indonesia that have to rely exclusively on kratom harvesting. And if they can't, if the import alert is imposed in some effective way, then that means that these farmers are going to have to find some other means of livelihood for them and their families. And the only option would be to go to palm oil or rubber production or timbering. And to do that, they would have to take down 21 million kratom trees, which is a substantial amount of these very highly sensitive, environmentally sensitive Borneo rainforest in that area, for which the last time that this was done in any major way in 2015 caused such toxic fumes that it killed 30,000 people, and it led to health conditions that were ridiculously bad in that area. And that required the Indonesian government to make commitments with the United States that they would improve the various kinds of practices that they were engaged in to start slowing down the deforestation of the Borneo rainforest, and they have substantially done so. But this import alert creates, however unintended it is, the very thing that we don't want to see happen, which is these huge climate impacts, not to mention, obviously, the human costs that are associated with that. All for what? Because the FDA that cannot justify the scheduling of kratom, that the FDA, who doesn't like any botanical supplement, proof is in the pudding on the number of applications that they have received for botanical supplements under the authority established by Congress for manufacturers to produce those. Of 800 filed applications, 2 have been approved in the last 15 years. The FDA has routinely turned down new dietary ingredient notifications by manufacturers of kratom products, including a recent one that had human clinical trial data showing its safety and addiction liability within the parameters set by the FDA. The FDA is not going to move on this. They're biased, they're wrong, and so we have to take this legislation. It also will do another important thing, and that is allow kratom consumers to testify. And then the transcripts of those testimonies, along with scientific evidence, would have to be published on the FDA website. So no longer will we see the disinformation that the FDA publishes about kratom to become the rule of the land. No longer will we see their ability to jawbone the Mayo Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic and WebMD to say horrible things about kratom, even though those very trusted health websites haven't done a lick of research on kratom. They follow what the FDA says. So now we'll have a balanced perspective on kratom that we can point to, and I think that's important. And even those who are critics, even those that are critics of us would absolutely believe that we should regulate it. Even the kratom danger awareness community, and again, this is the most ardent people that are opposed to kratom, would have to agree that if you can't ban it, then you should regulate it, because an unregulated marketplace leaves you exactly where they found themselves, with potential fatalities resulting from adulterated products. And while that's not favored by the trial attorneys, because there's no money to be made there when you regulate it properly, when it's labeled properly, we simply have to come to a common sense position. We have to get to a better place in all of this. So great opportunity for us to tell our story as a part of a congressional briefing on Capitol Hill on December 13th at 11:30 a.m. in the Capitol Visitor Center. A great opportunity for you then to spread throughout the Hill and go to congressional offices and spread the word. We need as many people who can make the sacrifice to be here to join us in doing that, so that we can tell the truth about kratom, because our critics will be there. The trial attorneys will jump up and down and they'll start yelling and screaming, and they might even fund a lot of families to come to tell their story about kratom, and that's fine. We don't begrudge people telling their stories. There are anti-kratom people on this call today. We have not blocked them. Now, I made an application to join the kratom danger awareness for the purpose as I described in my application, so that I should share some information, and I was blocked. There's no two-way street here. There's no interest in finding the truth. There's no interest in sharing information. They're one-sided. They can say whatever they want, and they can wrap themselves in their moral authority, all they choose to do so. But if they're not willing to at least hear another point of view, then that tells you a lot about where they are. We're not going to be in that position. Now there may be other groups outside of the AKA that do it, but we are not blocking anybody, and we've allowed them to participate. We've even allowed people to participate in the kratom community that we know are irresponsible, that shouldn't be allowed in any public forum, because they don't know what they're doing. They're deranged, and they know who I'm talking about, and I think others do too. But we still allow them to show up, and I know some of them are on here tonight, and they'll walk away and they'll say, "Oh, Mac Haddow's a terrible person. The AKA is a terrible organization," and they do whatever they can to destroy us. But yet they can make up whatever narrative they choose, or they can choose to make up whatever misstatements of fact they choose. We're going to try to rely again on solid science. We're going to try to be reasonable in our approach. We're going to try to be, as best we can, to be accepting of other viewpoints. And we're going to try, as everyone should, to be civil in this discussion. So with that, I'll conclude. Thanks to everyone. As we go forward here, we're seeing real progress. When we see that President Widodo raised this issue in a bilateral meeting with President Biden today, it's evidence that our voices are being heard. And the fact that his administration in Indonesia has applied for relief from the import alert, our voices are being heard. And the fact that we're going to be up on Capitol Hill on December 13th, giving a congressional briefing that will allow for congressional staffers and members to hear the truth about kratom from independent scientists, for the most part, in that panel, is a representation that our voices make a difference. They matter. And so we'd encourage everyone who can to do that. So I'll conclude there. Thanks everyone for joining us here. I'm very glad I'll turn it back to Ryan. Glad to answer any questions that anyone might have.
That's great. Thank you, Mac. And we have just one question so far. Will the FDA have officials giving opposing viewpoints at the congressional presentation on December 13th?
No, we haven't invited the FDA to come down and make their presentation. And here's why. The FDA hasn't listened to us one time. We set up a meeting that was supposed to be with 12 FDA officials back in December of 2022. It was supposed to be an hour and a half of a free flow discussion about kratom and the science that we had. We had scientists on that call. At the outset of the call, the FDA said, well, wait a minute, this is only a listening session. We will not listen or respond to anything you say. There will be no dialogue from us. We'll listen to what you say, and that's it. So we got 30 minutes to make a presentation, and then they hung up on us. They have not responded to my request that they respond to the issues that we raised. They're just simply not going to do it. And I had a discussion with an FDA official at the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs meeting last March in Vienna. And he only agreed to talk to me if we could do it off the record. So I'm not going to tell you his name. But when we sat down for a 90-minute conversation, he admitted some very important things. He said, most of us at the FDA agree that kratom is fine, it's safe, unless it's abused. And we also agreed that it shouldn't be adulterated. But what we can't get by is the fact that people are sitting out there literally self-medicating with kratom. And we think that should be done with a doctor's prescription. Well, with a doctor's prescription, that's talking about making it a drug. That means you go through the new drug application process. And when that happens, all supplements are excluded from the marketplace because you have a prescription drug. It requires a $3 to $5 billion investment, 5 to 10 years of research by the FDA, which, by the way, is the judge, jury, and executioner. And they won't even listen to a company that comes for a new dietary ingredient notification with human clinical trial data. They won't even listen to them. And so that tells you that they're a biased organization. So we have not invited them to be on the panel. What we've invited are independent researchers to be on that panel to make their presentation. And of course, if they agree with the FDA, they're free to say that. I think that we'll get a pretty good independent view of those circumstances when we have the actual briefing.
That's great. Thank you, Mac. Not seeing any other questions for discussion. I'd be happy to turn it over to you and Matt for closing comments.
So I just see people commenting that they want to know if we can offer discounts in hotels, where should they stay, that kind of thing. I think we can provide information about that, and we send out emails to help people. We don't have a block of hotel rooms. That requires a commitment that we're not financially in the position to provide. But we can certainly help you look at discount areas where you can stay, how to easily access Capitol Hill. This is not uncommon for people to come to Washington for this very purpose. And so I think that's important, and we'll certainly help with that. The question is raised that how would the federal KCPA affect state bans? They really don't, except for one thing. They will set into statutory authority what the FDA promised those states that banned kratom between 2014 and 2017, which was that we're going to have a federal ban. What we will have instead of that is a federal regulatory scheme. There will be no reason for a state at that juncture to have any kratom ban in effect. And we know that we've already got Vermont turned around on it. They're in the process of doing their rulemaking to remove kratom from their drug control list. We know that in Rhode Island and Wisconsin and Indiana and in Arkansas, they're making huge steps. And I hope I said Wisconsin, to reverse the bans. The only one we haven't made progress on yet, and we're optimistic we will eventually, is Alabama. But the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act will set the standard for us to actually point to those states and say, the big issue the FDA told you was that you needed to ban it. Well, now we can see that you don't have to, that you just regulate it along the way. So that's the way it goes. And what happens with this process, so everyone knows, this bill's been filed. Probably sometime after the first of the year, it will be assigned to committees for hearings. And then we'll have our chance both sides will have a chance to come up and talk about this. And that's where the FDA can have their forum if they choose to do so. And then we'll move on from the committee to a vote on the floor of each respective body. And hopefully that'll be voted on sometime next year. We're optimistic about that. This is the legislative process is difficult to predict. And sometimes impossible to know the timetable, but we've started this process, the discussion's underway, and I think that's a healthy kind of thing for us to do.
Perfect.
I see a lot of things in here, Ryan, and just people can't
Yeah,
ask.
sorry, Mac. I was
Yeah,
typing an answer and
well, yeah, there's a lot of logistics involved here. Can we help with carpooling? You have adequate social media resources where you can help each other kind of figure that out. We'll do whatever we can, but we're going to do our best to be supportive when you get here so that we can help you set up the meetings with your congressional representatives. We'll do that in advance of you being here, obviously, and we're going to keep doing this. Another question here I saw was that there are questions about how we're doing in some states and how we're doing in some localities. The anti-kratom forces are very effective in going to local jurisdictions, and they're promoting their disinformation about kratom. I was in on a meeting in Massachusetts where the health department there was ready to ban it, and we were able to convince them to take a deeper look at this. I'm hopeful they'll come to the right decision. We don't win every battle at the local level, but we win many. We're going to continue to do our best. It stretches our resources, very frankly, and we've got a lot of battles and a lot of irons in the fire, but we're doing our best to work through that, and we'll continue to do so. We need the help of every kratom advocate to show up at these local meetings, because sometimes when we get on these meetings and involved in them, we don't see the support that we really need. And people need to understand that a local constituent standing at that microphone in that meeting makes a huge difference in these local elected officials in hearing your voice. So we encourage everyone, to the extent that you're able to do so, to rally to participate in those local meetings as well.
that's great. Thank you. And one question, any progress in Maryland?
So we have not made any progress. We certainly have stopped the ban. In terms of getting a pathway for the KCPA, I think it's just a matter of our continuing to work there, hopefully identify a sponsor of the bill that will move it through. I suspect that in Maryland, we're going to have to go another year when they see more states add on. I've had great conversations with a number of Maryland legislators who want to see balanced regulation on this. We'll see how it goes, but I think we're probably looking at 2025 for Maryland.
Right. Realistically, what effect do you think the rash of wrongful death lawsuits will have? Will the AKA be involved in correcting misinformation that will inevitably be presented as evidence in any trials resulting from them?
I can't understate the level of the lies that are told by the trial attorneys. You just have to look on the website of one of the leading trial attorneys, where he refers to what he calls as evidence as early 2018. That's amazing. Before that evidence was evaluated by an independent source like Dr. Joie, who called it embarrassingly poor evidence and data, they have the gall to stand up and say, oh, well, this proves that kratom is dangerous. This is nonsense. And so, yes, the answer to the question directly is we will provide every connection to experts, every connection to scientific research that's available to help in any case where there is a trial attorney that's making an irresponsible claim about the safety of kratom. They can't win their battle in the courtroom if the truth comes out. They fight their battle in what I would characterize as unfair ways. There is going to be a major series of hit pieces published by a newspaper in Florida. And I say that because I've seen the evidence directly of the questions they ask, of the reports on where they're going into kratom manufacturers around the country, the nature of their inquiries to them. There's nothing fair about it, nothing equitable about it. And we know that the trial attorneys have been working directly with kratom critics that are advocates, pushing them to talk to the reporters. And when someone asks, well, what should I say when I talk to this reporter? That trial attorney says, well, just use my name. I'm all in with them. And yet I can tell you with certainty that I am not all in with the Tampa Bay Times. It is a major hit job. So we have to confront that and deal with it and just accept that there are going to be critics out there that aren't about the truth. But I'll tell you how pernicious it gets. There was a podcast by the Georgia Medical Association that featured a physician and the trial attorneys. When I called to ask if they would allow me to come on a podcast with them, they said, oh, well, no, you have to be one of our gold supporters to do that. And I said, how much does that cost? The number was astounding. So they buy their way into these kinds of activities. And that just shows you how irresponsible it is. So will we fight? We're going to fight as hard as we can in order to protect Kratom. We're going to support whatever as best we can where the cases merit it, where we can fight back against these trial attorneys. We're doing everything we can.
Perfect. Thank you. And I believe we've caught everything now, Mac. There was a little bit of a rush of questions, but for me, my closing comments, and I'll turn it back to Mac again, Ryan at americankratom.org. Please send me any questions if I missed something tonight here. But and again, we'll have specifics out very soon. We just finalized the details today for the meeting on the 13th. So we will have further instructions out very soon. And I'll turn it to Mac for closing comments.
Yeah, thank you. And I noticed one of the comments from Sherry. Thank you for that kind remark. But let me tell you that we appreciate what every Kratom consumer is doing and standing up and fighting for our right to make informed choices about the substances that we choose to use that assist in keeping our health and well-being in the proper place. We have the right to do that, and the FDA can't dictate this as much as they would like to. And you and all of the advocates are in our prayers as well. I'm grateful to all of you. I know that the American Kratom Association would not exist but for your efforts and your support and your financial support. So we're grateful for all of that. And even those that can't financially support us, and we know circumstances are tough in the current economy, your voice is equally as important. So we're deeply appreciative of that. We look forward to seeing as many of you who can be there at the congressional briefing. We're going to work on the logistics for streaming it so that those that can't make it to Washington will be able to actually participate. But I would ask you to do two things, or consider two things. One, go to our website, sign up to have a conversation with your congressional delegation, your two senators and your representative. And you can do that through the app tool that we've provided, and we would welcome your doing that. And the second thing we would ask you to consider doing is to make sure that you're actively involved in promoting Kratom as best you can on social media sites and all that, because I know it gets frustrating. And let's be respectful and civil, even for those people that we don't particularly agree with, even for those people that we know are just plain wrong. And I'm talking about both anti-Kratom and those that think they know better than everybody else in the pro-Kratom community. And I'll say this directly to those in our community. I don't suggest that I'm perfect. I certainly have not been perfect in my life. I've made mistakes that I regret. And I'm paying the price from your nasty remarks about it. That's fine. I know that there are many people that think that the American Kratom Association is dictated by what the industry wants. And I can assure you that's not true, because we advocate for consumers. The development of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act and the standards that are embedded in it were developed by scientists and by former FDA officials. There wasn't one industry person that had any say in the development of that KCPA. And that will be our pledge going forward. We will listen to anyone, but the actual decisions and the independence of our decisions about what should be included in the good manufacturing practices, in the standards we set in the proposed KCPA, and in the labeling is driven by science, not by anyone's opinion. And we will continue to fight for that and for your right to buy a safe Kratom product that's properly labeled, so you know that you can make an informed choice about how to consume it. Will there be people that abuse it? Of course. Will there be circumstances in which there are adverse health events because of unknown circumstances? Yes. Is Kratom safe? Yes, if it's responsibly consumed. Is Kratom dangerously addictive? No, if it's responsibly consumed. So those are the things that we'll continue to fight for, and certainly to keep the freedom that you should have to make these informed choices about the products you use for health and well-being. So thanks to everyone. We will continue to engage in these important topics, continue to stand up and fight for you. We hope to continue to earn your support.